Chapter 11. Randy looked down at his rice. He wasn't sure if he was more surprised that he was sitting at a dining table reserved for guests, or that Madame Chang was smiling. Because, instead of being disgusted that a fat toad had landed next to her, Madame Chang had beamed, as if greeting an old friend. Her welcome had included Randy, who she had insisted sit with her, Mr. Shan, Pei, and the toad for lunch. Master Chow had shrugged permission, Madame Chang's choice of a chore boy as a dining companion as perplexing to him as her choice of the toad. However, the toad's company seemed to be more appreciated than Randy's. Pei clapped her hands, and Mr. Shan had brightened and smiled at it. Looking more awake and alive than Randy had ever seen him before, Mr. Shan had petted the toad and then reached into his pocket and took out 2 copper coins tied together with a red string. He rattled it in front of the toad, like a toy in front of a baby. Instead of groaning painful sounds like the ones Randy heard at night, the toad was now gurgling and giggling. "You're playing with a toad," Randy said with a note of disgust. Pei rolled her eyes. "It's more fun than you," she said. He began to respond with a rude insult, but suddenly the image of the cold, grim stone tablet came into Randy's mind. He closed his mouth. "Randy," Madame Chang said as he paused, "Pei says that you haven't ever smiled since you've been here. Is that true?" Randy shrugged. "Yesterday, I noticed that you seemed to enjoy my story," Madame Chang said. "Am I right?" Randy nodded grudgingly. "It was interesting," he said. "Well, I want to make a deal with you," Madame Chang said. "If I can make you smile, no, if I can make you laugh with this next story, then for every story I tell, you must tell one of your own." "I don't know any stories," Randy protested. "Oh, I'm sure you do," Madame Chang said, smiling at him in a teasing way. "You've just never shared them before. And I'll give you plenty of time to think of one. You can tell yours at dinner." "I want to hear the funny story," Pei said. Mr. Shan nodded, and the toad croaked as if in agreement. Even Master Chow, standing at the back of the room, seemed to be looking at Randy. Randy shrugged again. "Does it have to be a good story?" he asked. "Any story you want," Madame Chang said. "We won't complain." "I will," Pei said, but Madame Chang ignored her. "Is it a deal?" Madame Chang said, looking at Randy. He hesitated. "Oh, Randy," Pei said, irritated. "You're not going to laugh anyway." "All right," Randy said. "Why not?" he thought. Madame Chang smiled. Unexpectedly, she turned her head and looked at Master Chow. He had been pretending that their conversation was unworthy of his attention, but it was plain to see that he had been listening closely. He quickly looked away and pushed the beads on his abacus as if he were deep in calculation. Madame Chang's smile grew larger, and she began the story. The story of the old sage. Once, there was an old man who lived on a mountaintop. Some thought he was a crazy old man. Others thought he was the mountain spirit, or even an immortal. But most believed he was a sage of great wisdom. Many sought him, some for answers, some for advice, and some to be his students. The old man answered all the questions and solved all the problems, but he shooed away all the hopeful students. However, one student named Tiu refused to give up. He returned over and over again, begging and pleading, until finally the sage agreed to teach him. Tiu was an eager pupil. At the sun's first light, the sage would share the old stories and teachings, and they would spend the rest of the day in deep contemplation. But at night, when the moon climbed into the sky, the old man ignored his student and instead read to himself from a large book. Tiu wondered about this. It was obvious to him that There was great wisdom in the book that only the sage read. What special knowledge was in it? He yearned to know. But the sage never offered him even a glance at one of the pages. However, Tiu was a reasonable fellow. He will allow me to read the book, he thought, when I have mastered everything else he has taught me. So he set his mind on his lessons, learning in earnest. And with such effort, his progress was quite considerable. Soon, when people came to see the old sage for answers, Tiu was able to give them. Before long, Tiu also began to gain the reputation of being a wise man. Encouraged by this, Tiu finally gathered the courage to ask the sage about the book. One night, as the old man read silently, Tiu asked, "Master, what are you reading in that book?" "The page I am reading right now," the old man said without looking up, "is about the secret to attaining peace." The secret to peace? Tiu was in awe. Only the wisest and greatest of sages would know that. The book was full of wonderful secrets. What other extraordinary answers were in that book? "Master," Tiu said, "may I read the secret to peace too?" The old man looked at him. "Do you really wish to know the secret to peace?" he asked. "Or do you simply wish to read the Book of Fortune?" Tiu thought carefully, and then said honestly, "Both." The sage said nothing, stroking his beard in thought. Tiu could sense his doubt. Finally, the sage said, "Do you really believe you are ready?" "Yes," Tiu said confidently. In his mind, the only thing that kept him and the sage from being equals was the knowledge in the book. "I am not sure," the old man said. "I am," Tiu said. "Please, how can I prove it to you?" The sage sat thoughtfully for a moment, and then said, "At the bottom of this mountain, you will see a tall tree overlooking a lake. Climb the tree to the highest branch, and sit there in contemplation for 99 days and nights. If you are able to do that, you may read the Book of Fortune and the secret to achieving peace." Immediately, Tiu traveled down the mountain, and he found the tall tree overlooking the lake. The tree was smooth and straight, like a giant paintbrush, and seemed almost as tall as the mountain he had just left. With great difficulty, Tiu wrapped a rope around the trunk of the tree and made his way up to the highest branch. At the top, he sat in complete confidence. He was sure he could meet his master's requirements and return to learn the great secret. The sun rose and dropped, the moon filled and emptied, and Tiu watched it all from the top of the tree. Nearby villagers, finding it easier to call up questions to someone in a tree than to climb a mountain, sent him baskets of food, which he hauled up using his rope. Soon, he began to bestow answers and advice to a steady stream of followers. On the 96th night, there was a terrible storm. The wind shrieked and screamed, and the thunder's roars echoed for miles away. Lightning slashed the sky, and rain attacked like vicious arrows. The tree swayed and bent, but Tiu, remembering his master's teachings, did not panic. Even as nearby branches cracked and fell, and rain and wind slapped his face raw, he sat silently, like a stone statue. The next morning, everyone crowded around the tree to see Tiu sitting calmly up in the branches. "He is without a doubt a great sage," they said to one another. "Only one who has achieved real enlightenment could be unmoved by that storm," and they hailed and honored him from the ground. Tiu heard their praises and felt quite satisfied. "I have truly proven myself," he thought, and wrote a poem. "Like a mountain of stone, the most powerful wind, the most thunderous noise cannot move me. Steadfast my mind, deliverance my gain." This he decided to send to his master, the old man on the mountain. One of Tiu's admirers quickly brought it to the sage. The old man read the poem and smiled. Then he flipped the paper over and wrote in dark characters, B-U-R-P, and sent it back to Tiu. Tiu quickly read the reply, expecting praise from his teacher. When he saw what his master had scrawled on the page instead, Tiu was very insulted. "Burp," he said indignantly. "I speak of sacrifice and great knowledge, and he returns this? What does he mean?" Offended, Tiu rushed down the tree and up the mountain. With every step, he felt more resentful of his master's response. So when he finally saw the old sage sitting calmly, Tiu immediately began to berate him. "What is this?" Tiu said, waving the message angrily. "Burp, what did you mean?" The old man waited until Tiu paused for breath. "You said the most powerful wind and the loudest noise could not move you," the sage said with a smile. "But it took only one burp to bring you here." With those words, Madame Chang finished the story and looked at Rendy. His mouth had curved, and a noise snorted out of his nose. It was only when the sound joined everyone else's that he realized he was laughing. Chapter 12. After lunch, Rendy went to collect water from the half-moon well. Ever since he had arrived at the village of Clear Sky, all his time from lunch until dinner was spent doing this. Rendy walked back and forth on the twisting street between the inn and the well, until the sun sat right on the horizon like a balancing egg yolk. The half-moon well was divided by a crumbling stone wall. It had been the wall of a courtyard, protecting a wealthy home when the village of Clear Sky was rich and prospering. At that time, the owner must have been generous, for he had dug half the well beyond the wall so that poor peasants could use it too. To them, the split well had looked like the half-circle of the mid-month moon, so they called it the half-moon well. However, now with the wall in ruins, the well looked more like a full moon with a scar down its center. Rendy cursed it daily. The half-moon well was an awkward shape to haul water from, the dividing wall making the openings too small for buckets. Rendy was forced to use a small hollow gourd to draw up the water, which he emptied into the large buckets he carried to and from the inn. Every day, Rendy had to gather enough water for the garden and the inn, and he often felt as if he were trying to fill a lake using a spoon. Today, however, Rendy did not curse the well. He did not think of the whales in the sky that gave him no peace at night. He did not even plot or plan how he could leave the village. Instead, he was busy trying to think of a story to tell at dinner. He tried to remember old fairy tales told to him, or to make one up, but his mind remained empty. "Why did I agree to tell a story?" he groaned to himself. "Why does she want me to tell a story anyway?" So while his head was empty, the rest of him was full of anxiety. Even as he filled the oversized buckets with the gourd, his thoughts were turning and twisting like dough deep-frying in oil. Perhaps that was why, when Rendy had finished the tiring process of filling the buckets, he paid less attention to his feet than he should have. He had just balanced the carrying stick on his shoulders, still thinking furiously, and was stepping over the well when his back foot caught on the partition wall. In that instant, Rendy tripped. His bucket swung madly like crazed pendulums, splashing water in large waves, until everything, including Rendy, crashed to the ground. "Ow!" Rendy cried. He lay face down on the hard, dusty earth. Pain flashed through him, and a bump was already forming on the back of his head, where one of the buckets had struck him. But it was anger that was burning through Rendy like a hot fire. Already the spilled water, the water that took him so long to collect, was drying in the sun. "Stupid, stupid wall!" Rendy roared, jumping up and kicking the partition with his foot, resulting in new stabs of pain. With a yelp of anger, he began attacking the wall with all his strength. Boiling rage seemed to have bubbled and burst inside him. His every muscle throbbed with red fury. The air seemed to shriek in his ears, and the fierceness of his anger felt like explosions inside his head. His pole cracked, and the buckets bounced from the wall, but Rendy still felt as if he were ablaze with 1,000 bee stings. He fell to his knees and grabbed a rock with each hand and raised them to strike. But suddenly, his hands froze in the air, and the rocks dropped to the ground. For, unexpectedly, he saw his reflection in the well. The water on both sides of the well mirrored him, showing him in a way he had never seen before, roaring with anger and filled with rage. I look like, Rendy gasped. My father! He felt as if a searing knife had been stabbed into him, the reflections in the water revealing a likeness he almost could not bear. For a moment, he was blinded by a mix of memories, pain, and regret. When his vision cleared, Rendy was staring again at 2 images of himself. The faces that looked back at him were troubled and uneasy. He felt tired, as if he had been running for days. Tears stung his eyes, but the water and the stones of the wall were as still and unmoved as if they were the empty sky above. Chapter 13. During dinner, Rendy could sense everyone waiting for him. He had been late, for not only had he had to refill his buckets, they had also sprung leaks from his abuse, and he had to carry them by hand as he had broken his pole. So when he finally entered the inn, the expectant eyes weighed upon him even more than the thick, sticky summer air. Mr. Shan and the toad both croaked eagerly, and Master Chow was unusually attentive, while Rendy picked at the rice in his bowl. The thick, dark bowl, the color of burned wood, weighed heavily in Rendy's hands as he tried to avoid looking at Madame Chang. She said nothing, letting him push the grains of rice with his chopsticks and chew air long after everyone else had finished their meal. The sky darkened and grew heavier and heavier. Rendy cringed inside. The night would soon begin its crying, which would not help him with his storytelling. Perhaps he could make an excuse or pretend. Pei gave an impatient sigh. Come on, Rendy, Pei said. Stop trying to think of a trick to get out of telling a story. I'm sure Rendy is still just thinking of what he wants to tell, Madame Chang said. Whenever you are ready, Rendy. Rendy flushed at the truth of Pei's words. Madame Chang's kindness made him feel ashamed, but suddenly, as if by magic, I have a story to tell, Rendy said. Really? Pei said in disbelief. Yes, Rendy said, and began. The story of the dancing fish. Once, there was a powerful magistrate. Even though his son and daughter were not supposed to have heard, they knew that everyone called their father Magistrate Tiger. It was a fitting name, for the magistrate always seemed to be roaring at his servants, his wife, and even his children. And whenever he roared, all jumped to do his bidding. The blood of the greatest ruler and hero pumps in us, Magistrate Tiger would thunder to his young children, the green silk of his sleeves flapping. We must make the world bow to us again. Of course, Magistrate Tiger's children did not know what their father meant, and they were, in fact, too frightened to ask. But they knew that their father was always working to become more powerful, and that he even hoped the emperor himself would acknowledge him. Often, Magistrate Tiger made trips out of his district, trying to get closer and closer to being accepted by the imperial family. His children never knew if he was successful, but they did enjoy his frequent absences. The sight of a waiting carriage made his son feel like a bird about to take flight. The only people Magistrate Tiger did not roar at were his superiors. To kings and dukes and princes, His voice was silky and smooth, but perhaps they still would have called him Magistrate Tiger. To them, he purred like a cat. And he did more than purr, his son found out. One day, Magistrate Tiger arrived home with an expensive chin. Magistrate Tiger had never shown interest in music before, so the entire household was surprised to see the stringed instrument in his hands, and they were even more shocked when Magistrate Tiger began to teach himself how to play. After mastering a few simple songs, Magistrate Tiger called his children to him. Wearing a robe of brilliant green, he gave each of them a bowl of rice, and carrying the chin, had them follow him into the garden. They stopped in front of the pond, where dozens of bright orange carp waved in the water. Magistrate Tiger stationed his children on either side of him, and as he began to play the chin, instructed them to throw rice out into the water. The fish, seeing the food, began to jump up to eat the rice. Every day they did this. As Magistrate Tiger played the chin, the children threw rice, and the fish rushed for the food. Magistrate Tiger urged the children to throw the rice higher and higher, and the fish began to leap from the water to catch the grains. The children laughed, and it was, the son thought, the most enjoyable time he had ever spent with his father. But one day, when the son was playing up in a tree next to the pavilion of the fish pond, he saw his father, wearing his customary green silk robe, walking with his chin and a strange man. The man walked as if his neck could not bend toward the earth, and judging from the fineness of his clothes, he could only be a grand official or some sort of royalty. The son, who was not supposed to climb trees in the garden, quickly found a branch that hid him from view. "Ah, Dukja," Magistrate Tiger was saying in his smoothest voice. "I am so honored that you have finally accepted my invitation to visit. When I heard you are a connoisseur of music, I felt obliged to come," the Duke said. "Did you?" Magistrate Tiger said in surprise. "Yes," Duke Ja said. "Music reveals much about a person's character, does it not? Emotions and thoughts are communicated by it." "Oh, yes," Magistrate Tiger said, nodding. "I've heard you follow the ancient philosophy of music." "I suppose I do," Duke Ja smiled. "And not just music, but sound itself. If a listener truly understands, he can hear what others cannot. Sentiment and sound cannot be separated." "I've often thought the same," Magistrate Tiger said, and stood by the fish pond as if in deep thought. "Ah, but I'm not here to spout philosophy," Duke Ja said. "I'm here to hear you play. The finer the music, the more noble the person. Is that not true?" "My playing is elementary," Magistrate Tiger said humbly, "but I do try to convey my most noble thoughts with it." And without any further words, Magistrate Tiger began to strum the chin. As his familiar chords rang through the air, the fish began to jump out of the water, expecting the rice that had always been there before. They leaped again and again, as if dancing to the music. They shimmered in the sunlight, soaring and diving like cascades of orange and gold rainbows. It was beautiful. Slowly, Magistrate Tiger stopped playing. The carp slowly stopped jumping. As the chin rested silently, the pond was calm. Duke Ja looked amazed, and without a word, bowed to Magistrate Tiger. "I have never experienced such a wondrous sight," Duke Ja said. "To my ears your playing was simple, but it must have conveyed such harmonious thoughts that only the fish could hear and rejoice at. You must be a very virtuous and wise man, Magistrate." "Oh, you flatter me," Magistrate Tiger purred. "I simply try my best." "Your name has come up once or twice at some of the imperial functions," Duke Ja continued. "I will make sure that you begin to receive the attention you deserve."
"Thank you, Lord Duke," Magistrate Tiger said. "You are most gracious." The Duke turned around and began to walk back to the house. Magistrate Tiger moved to follow him, but before he turned, a look of triumphant conceit flashed on his face. The boy felt a shock run through him. It had been a trick. His father had planned the whole thing, the son realized. The practicing at the pond, the throwing of the rice every day. They had been training the fish to jump to Magistrate Tiger's music. And all of it had been done just to influence Duke Jia. As Magistrate Tiger and Duke Jia disappeared into the house, the boy dropped from the tree and stared blankly into the fish pond. It was clever of his father to trick the Duke, was it not? But as he remembered Duke Jia's serious, sincere face, filled with awe, the boy saw his own face in the still water before him, and his own face looked guilty. As Rendy finished the story, he looked at all of them, staring at him silently. "You said it didn't have to be a good story," he said crossly. "No, it was very good," Madam Chang said. "It was extremely interesting." "Yes," Pei nodded. "I'm just surprised." At that, Rendy grinned, and then he was the one who was surprised, because everyone smiled back. Chapter 14. When Rendy finished his story, the sunlight had all but disappeared, and the night sky seemed to be swallowing the small inn. Even as Master Chow lit the large lantern in the open doorway, the blackness spread like spilled ink. "So dark," Mr. Shan said to no one. After telling his story, Rendy felt surprisingly talkative, and the thoughts he had been holding inside began to leak out. "It's because the moon is gone. It's missing," Rendy said. "And the sky—" Rendy stopped. Did he dare mention the crying sky? Would they think he was crazy? "Nonsense," Master Chow said. "Missing moon. It's just another moonless night." "Rendy's right," Pei said. "The moon is lost." "Well, we didn't lose it," Master Chow said. "Someone else can go find it. We have other things to do." Rendy swallowed his disappointment. No one cared about the moon, and the wails he heard in the night probably were just in his head. As if agreeing, the dark sky began to sigh, a sad, miserable whimper. When Rendy looked up, Madam Chang was standing in front of him, looking out the window. There was a sadness in her eyes that he did not understand. "It is better to light a lantern than to bemoan the darkness," Madam Chang said softly to herself, as if in a dream. Pei heard her. "Can't we light more lanterns then?" she said eagerly, "to make up for the light of the moon?" "More lanterns?" Master Chow said, and a worried look flashed over his face. He stroked the red cinnabar beads of his belt decoration, the same way he touched the beads of his abacus, and suddenly Rendy saw that Master Chow had much more pride than he did wealth. "Pei, it would just be a waste of lantern oil." Madam Chang slowly turned. "We can't make up for the light of the moon," she said to Pei, "but we can make some light without wasting oil." She walked out through the door, as graceful as a curving wisp of gray smoke. Rendy and the others watched, silently captive, as she plucked a handful of tall, dry grass from the front of the inn. Her silver outline seemed to glide against the sky, making her look like a night fairy. And when she lit the ends of the grass with a small flame, Rendy, Pei, Mr. Shan, and Master Chow drew around her like moths. She smiled at them, holding the sheaves of lit grass as if they were incense sticks. The tips of the grass were burning orange embers, like bright seeds of light illuminating her face. Then Madam Chang waved her arm, and the embers glittered and scattered and flew in the darkness, 1,000 tiny glinting diamonds against the black silk of the night.
Madam Chang pulled a delicate, thin cloth from her neck. With a swift motion, the sheer fabric billowed over the flashing sparks, as if capturing them in a diaphanous cloud. Indeed, they were captured, for after Madam Chang knotted the cloth, she was holding a soft, glowing bag of light. Rendy, Pei, Mr. Shan, and Master Chow stood with a mix of fright and amazement. What magic had Madam Chang done? Madam Chang handed the bag to Pei, who took it with hesitation. Pei looked closely, and her face transformed from timidity to joyful wonder. "Fireflies," she whispered, enchanted. "It's a firefly lantern." The others crowded around, all fear disappearing. The bag was full of fireflies, and when Rendy looked up, there were hundreds and hundreds more, somehow summoned by Madam Chang. They were flickering and twinkling all around them, and Rendy felt as if he were in the starry river of the sky. Mr. Shan whooped like an excited young boy. "Firefly lanterns!" he hooted. "You can read under this light, too." With more energy and quickness than Rendy had ever imagined he had, Mr. Shan dropped his walking stick and leaped across the yard, his long legs making him look like a prancing deer. His beard flapped behind him as he tried to catch fireflies with his sleeve. "Come on, Rendy," Pei said, giving the firefly lantern to her father to hang. "There are enough fireflies to make lanterns for the whole inn." Rendy couldn't resist. Soon he found himself laughing a second time as he and Pei ran alongside Mr. Shan, collecting fireflies. Madam Chang supplied translucent cloth and paper for the gatherers, and Master Chow strung the lanterns on a line. The other villagers, attracted by the lights and noise, came out of their homes and were urged to join in by Pei and Mr. Shan. Soon, everyone in the whole small village of Clear Sky was catching fireflies in front of the inn, enjoying themselves in a way they had not for a long time. Their faces were as radiant from pleasure as they were from the brightness, and even Widow Yan and Mei Lan, unnoticed by Master Chow, gazed over the wall with smiles. However, just as Madam Chang was handing Rendy another cloth, the sky gave a loud, plaintive wail, echoing as if annoyed at being ignored. Rendy clutched his ears like he always did. "Rendy," Madam Chang asked, shaking him gently, "what's wrong?" "The night is crying," Rendy said, unable to stop himself. "Don't you hear it? It's so loud." But Widow Yan, Mei Lan, and the yard full of galloping villagers looked undisturbed, and Pei continued handing her father lanterns, obviously only hearing the sound of laughter. Mr. Shan was gazing at his bag of fireflies, as if mesmerized. Had he heard it? Madam Chang looked at Rendy and stood very still. The wind moaned again. "You don't hear it?" Rendy asked, almost begging. Was he imagining it? He didn't want to be crazy. "Pei and Master Chow and the villagers don't hear it either. What's wrong with me?" "I hear it, Rendy," Madam Chang said, putting her hand on his shoulder to reassure him. "But I hear it only faintly. There's nothing wrong with you. You just hear it the most out of everyone." "Why?" Rendy asked. "Why me?" The sky sent out another pitiful groan, and Rendy looked at her in confusion. "Remember your story?" Madam Chang said. "The Duke believed that if a listener truly understands, he can hear what others cannot. You must understand in a way none of us do." "But that wasn't true," Rendy protested. "The Duke was tricked." "The Duke was tricked," Madam Chang said. "But that does not mean what he believed was false." The light of the firefly lanterns flickered, and shadows wavered over Rendy's frowning face. At least he wasn't crazy, he thought. Rendy looked up at Madam Chang, and 100 questions formed on his lips. But when the wind gave another restless whimper, Rendy asked,
Did you ever find out the secret to peace?
Madam Chang pressed her hand softly on Rendy's shoulder and smiled. What do you think? She said. Then she turned and left Rendy alone with his thoughts.
Chapter 15. No moon, no rain, no rest, Rendy groaned to himself. Even though he was relieved that the night moans were not his imaginings, they still kept him up at night, making his sleep restless and poor. Peace could not be found in the daytime either. The sun baked the earth like a kiln, and Rendy felt like a hardened pot as he did his chores in the scalding sun. His frustration returned, and he again counted his days in the village with annoyance. But when he watched Madam Chang come down the stairs for lunch, Rendy suddenly thought, how stupid I've been. Madam Chang came by foot. I don't need to wait for a guest with a cart. I can just pack up my things and leave. Rendy almost laughed out loud, his mood lightening. Today, he thought, maybe I'll go today. The others were in good spirits too, even the toad sitting next to Mr. Shan's lunchtime bowl of rice. The toad's wide mouth curved into something like a grin as Mr. Shan jangled the string of copper coins. The toad jumped as Mr. Shan jerked the coins, their clinking noises sounding like tiny bells. "Rabbit," he said playfully to the toad. "Rabbit." "It's not a rabbit, it's a toad," Rendy said. Poor Mr. Shan, always confused. "Oh, but it jumps like a rabbit," Mr. Shan said, looking at Rendy. Mr. Shan's gaze was disconcerting to Rendy, who realized he had never looked directly into Mr. Shan's eyes before. They were dark and deep, like the inside of the well Rendy gathered water from. But the expression in them was slightly lost, as if he were being led by a faint, faraway lantern. "And maybe it is a rabbit inside," Madam Chang said. Even when Wang Yi's wife was transformed into a toad, she was still herself inside. "Wang Yi's wife?" Pei Yi said. "Like in your story, the wife of the man who shot down the suns?" Madam Chang nodded, and Pei Yi seemed to bask in her glow. "Tell me," Pei Yi begged. "That depends on Rendy," Madam Chang said, looking at him. "If I tell another story, so must he." Rendy flushed, and it was not from the heat. He felt everyone's eyes upon him again, and he shrugged. "It's fine," he said. What did it matter, he thought. He would be gone before he had to tell another story anyway. Madam Chang beamed and began the story. The story of Wang Yi's wife. After Wang Yi shot down the suns, all hailed him as a great hero. The sky, earth, and seas echoed with his praises, and the people gave him every honor imaginable, including proclaiming him emperor. But there was an even greater reward given to him. The Queen Mother of the Heavens, impressed by Wang Yi's deeds, requested a visit. When Wang Yi arrived at the heavenly palace, he was awed by its golden splendor and gave the Queen Mother his greatest respect and reverence. Well pleased by Wang Yi's humble deference, the Queen Mother decided to give him an unimaginable gift. It was a pill of immortality. "It is not ripe yet," the Queen Mother told him when he opened the intricately carved box, made from a golden peach pit. Inside was a slippery, round object, rather like a large frog's egg. "Right now it is soft and clear," the Queen Mother continued. "But it will turn hard as jade, and then white like the moon, until finally it will become gold like the sun. When the pill is gold, it is ready, and if you swallow it then, you will never die. You will achieve immortality." Scarcely believing his good fortune, Wang Yi thanked the Queen Mother profusely and returned to Earth. He hid the pill in his arrow case and told only his wife of its existence. Then,
Wang Yi began to rule the people of the land. But gradually, as years passed, he became spoiled by all the admiration and glory. Slowly, he began to see everyone as his slaves and servants, existing only to do his bidding. Knowing that immortality waited for him, Wang Yi finally believed he should be treated as a god. He became proud and hard, demanding that his every whim be satisfied. He brutally punished anyone who displeased him, without more thought than if they were ants waiting to be crushed. And through all this, Wang Yi's wife watched, grief-stricken, as the husband she loved changed into a cruel and selfish ruler. Again and again, she would plead for the punished and try to calm Wang Yi's arrogant anger. But before long, he did not even hear her gentle words. Oh, how wretched her life became, how she despaired and wept. The shining gold of the palace could not brighten her misery, and her heart was heavy, even as she wore delicate silk, as fine as cobwebs. She shut herself in her rooms, unable to bear the sufferings Wang Yi was causing. One late afternoon, in her unhappiness, Wang Yi's wife took out the poor cotton robes she had worn before Wang Yi had been made emperor. As her tears fell, she found the arrow that she had taken from Wang Yi's case so long ago when he had shot down the live sons. Quietly, she went to return the arrow to the case. But as she placed the arrow back, something seemed to flash at her like a flame. It was the golden box. Almost immediately, she knew what it was. What else could be in such a wondrous golden box, carved with 9 chrysanthemum flowers and gleaming in such a way that it could only be made from the pit of a peach of longevity? With trembling hands, she opened the box and stared at the white and glowing pill of immortality. She could almost feel the power of the pill vibrating in her hands. If Wang Yi becomes immortal, she thought, he will be emperor for all eternity. She shuddered as she thought of him now, vain and pitiless. The pill was his, and it did not belong to her, yet if he kept it, his cruelty would continue forever. He would never forgive her, but "I can't let him take the pill," she cried. She threw the pill on the ground and stepped on it. She pounded it with a jade vase. She thrust it in a bowl of water, but the pill remained unharmed, smooth, and radiant like a lustrous pearl. It could not be destroyed. And it could not be hidden safely either, Wang Yi's wife realized. If she hid it, he would search and search until it was found, not caring whom or what he destroyed until he got what he wanted. Night had fallen, and she heard the heavy footsteps of Wang Yi coming for her. She fluttered around the room like a trapped butterfly, but as the clear light of the pill shimmered, she suddenly knew what to do. So when Wang Yi opened the door, she stood waiting for him with the shining pill in her hand. He stared at her, surprised and speechless, and in that moment of shock, she put the white pill in her mouth and swallowed. A searing pain swelled inside her, as if she was being filled with a vicious poison. Her skin tightened, choking her, and her eyes closed as she fell to the floor, gasping. As she put her hands on the floor to lift herself, she was horrified to see that they had become mottled, wrinkled, and webbed. They were the hands of a toad. When she looked up at Wang Yi, through his look of revulsion and fear, she could see her reflection in his eyes. It was not just her hands that were toad-like. She herself had been transformed into a giant toad. Wang Yi, finally recovering from his astonishment, gave a shout of anger and started toward her. In terror, she jumped out the door and into the courtyard and the cool night air. As Wang Yi chased her, she leaped away with all her strength. To the surprise of them both, her jumps brought her deep into the sky, higher than the palace rooftops and the mountain peak, into where the sky turned into the Starry River. The stars glittered around her like fireflies, and the night water clasped her with welcoming waves. But she was too frightened to understand what had happened.
She could still hear Wang Yi's cries of fury, and her transformation into a toad had confused her. In the distance, in front of her, she saw a round, glowing object as smooth and as white as a pearl. Another pill, she thought, bewildered. I'll swallow that one too. She jumped toward it, her silhouette darkening its surface. But instead of swallowing it, she landed on it. For it was the moon, and her new home. But even as a toad, Madame Chang finished, she was still herself on the inside. The pill she had swallowed just transformed her appearance. Did she always stay a toad? Pei asked, wide-eyed. Madame Chang smiled faintly. The sadness that Rendy had seen earlier in her eyes returned, and he looked at her curiously. Many believe that as Wang Yi's wife lived on the moon, the pill slowly ripened inside her, she said. And one day, when it was finally gold, she changed back into a woman and became the Moon Lady. The Moon Lady? Rendy asked. He vaguely remembered hearing that name before, and had a sudden vision of his mother tilting her head toward the moon with her eyes closed. Doesn't the Moon Lady make wishes come true or something? They say the Moon Lady can hear your most secret wish and grant it, Madame Chang said. It may be a wish so secret that you don't even know you have it. Is your secret wish to turn back into a rabbit? Mr. Shan said playfully to the toad, the coins tinkling as he rattled them. You'll have to go to the moon. But there is no moon now, Rendy thought. Without it, can the Moon Lady still grant wishes? Does she wish the sky would stop crying and the moon would come back? Would she grant my wish of leaving the village of clear sky? Chapter 16. Rendy walked down the shady side of a twisted street. Even the scant protection of shadows was welcome in the searing sun. I'll just get some water at the half-moon well, and then I'll pack up my things at the inn and leave, he thought. The swinging sound of his mended buckets on his new carrying stick echoed against the crumbling stones of the empty ruins. However, the ruins were not completely empty. In front of him, Rendy saw a figure at the half-moon well. As he drew closer, he recognized Mr. Shan. He was on his knees, gazing into the well. Mr. Shan? Rendy said, putting his buckets down. What are you doing here? Mr. Shan did not seem to hear him and continued to look into the well. Rendy saw the toad, also at the well's edge, its bulging eyes gazing into the hole. Rendy kneeled by them and tried to see what they were looking at. All he saw was darkness and the slight shimmer of light on the deep water. Is something wrong with the half-moon well? Rendy asked. Half-moon. It was not a half-moon, Mr. Shan mumbled as if he hadn't heard. It was a full moon. I need a full moon to see. And still, without looking at Rendy, Mr. Shan put his hands on the wall that split the well in half and pushed down with a surprising force. Crack! Crack! The remains of the dividing wall crumbled and fell. Dry dust misted up into the air like steam, and the splashing noises of rocks falling filled the air. When all was quiet, the well was a round circle. Rendy's mouth was also a round circle. He had struck that same wall with all his might, cracking his stick and breaking his buckets. All his efforts had not even loosened a single stone, yet Mr. Shan had knocked it down with a single push of his wrinkled, aged hands. But Mr. Shan did not seem to be aware that he had done anything extraordinary. He peered again into the well. The reflections on the dark water sparkled up beams of light. The toad croaked a groan. Did you drop something down there? Rendy asked, after taking a deep breath and hiding his surprise. No, it's not in this water, Mr. Shan said, his eyes clouding over. It's in a different water. He's confused again, Rendy thought, and before he could be annoyed, he remembered Madame Chang's patient smile. Mr. Shan, Rendy said,
more gently than he ever had before.
"I don't think there's anything in there."
Mr. Shan put the toad in his pocket and pushed himself up with his walking stick.
"Yes, now there's nothing,"
he said, nodding in his absent-minded way.
"Don't jump in."
"Don't worry," Rendy said, amused.
"I won't."
Mr. Shan's eyes seemed to clear, and he peered at Rendy, the power of his gaze hitting Rendy like a falling stone. Rendy's smile faded, and a strange, discomforting feeling came over him, as if he had walked into a gray, clammy mist.
"Good,"
Mr. Shan said, nodding. He gently patted Rendy's shoulder.
"Make sure you do as you say."
And then Mr. Shan turned away. Rendy stared at Mr. Shan, slowly shuffling away, looking as ancient and as feeble as he always did. Rendy looked back at the well. A cold, icy wind seemed to blow through him. Suddenly, he had a vision of someone, something, a dark green blur leaping into the gaping hole of the well, angry roars echoing upward. Rendy shivered. Then he shook himself. The hot summer sun shone down, and its bright yellow light burned away any imaginings. He began to gather the water, which, now, with the partition gone, he was able to do faster than he ever had before. However, when Rendy returned to his room at the inn, he still felt the weight of Mr. Shan's words.
"Make sure you do as you say."
Rendy had said that he would tell a story for Madame Chang. They had an agreement. If he left now, he would be a liar and a cheater.
"Like my father,"
Rendy thought, and the sinking sun cast a dark shadow on his face. Finally, he opened his drawers and took out his belongings, carefully folding them into his plain cloth bag. His last item was a smooth blue and white rice bowl. It was thin and delicate, with faint traces of gold paint and a fineness that stood out in the poorness of his surroundings. Cupping it in his hands, Rendy gazed silently for a long moment.
"Why not?"
he said. Chapter 17. Rendy set down the chopsticks and the rice bowl, the thick, dark pottery of the bowl making a dull thud. While he waited for everyone else to finish dinner, he tried to look unconcerned and relaxed, even though he felt unexpectedly eager. He was pleased with himself. Tomorrow he would leave, but today he would do as he said he would and tell a story. It was better anyway, Rendy thought. He wouldn't want to walk at night with the wind crying and moaning above him.
Pei said,
looking at him from the corner of her eyes.
"Rendy, it almost seems like you want to tell a story."
Rendy looked away as if he'd been caught stealing. He quickly sipped his empty teacup, trying to look nonchalant. "If you are ready," Madame Chang said, smiling, "we are willing to listen." Mr. Shan and the toad seemed to nod in unison, and even Master Chow, giving up on his feigned indifference, looked up with interest. Rendy put down his cup and smiled in spite of himself. Then he took a deep breath and began his story.
The story of the 3 questions. Duke Jia did as he promised. He spoke of Magistrate Tiger to the imperial family with glowing words, and before long, Magistrate Tiger's dreams began to come true. As the summer was ending, he received an invitation that was awe-inspiring. It was from the imperial palace and invited him to come to the emperor's mid-autumn moon festivities. From that moment, Magistrate Tiger's home became a hectic typhoon. Magistrate Tiger's demanding roars echoed without stop as a new green robe was made and embroidered. Costly gifts, sculptures of jade and gold, were inspected, and fine horses were groomed. Everyone and everything was so full of activity that it was with great surprise to the children when one day their father called them.
"Children are supposed to be good at riddles," he said as they bowed at his feet. "If you have any intelligence at all, you will know the answers to these."
The children stared silently at their father and gulped. Magistrate Tiger looked at their fearful faces and made an expression of disdain, as if he had just eaten an unripe plum. "Here is the first question," Magistrate Tiger said. "A thief steals a purse, and a man chases and catches him. However, when the authorities arrive, both men accuse the other of being the thief. Both men are of the same build and height, and bystanders cannot say for certain which is the thief and which is the pursuer. How can you tell?" After a moment, just as Magistrate Tiger was about to sigh with impatience, the boy stepped forward. "I would have the two men race," the boy said, trying to keep his voice from quavering. "And the loser is the thief, for if the pursuer was able to catch the thief, he must be the faster runner of the two." Magistrate Tiger looked at his son keenly, and then nodded. "Good," he said, and before the children could feel relief or pride, he continued. "This is the second question," Magistrate Tiger said. "A single almond is given to a family of 99 members. How can you share the almond evenly?" The boy gave his sister a furtive glance, but she was already stepping forward with bright eyes. "I would boil the almond in water and make it into almond tea," she said, "and then all can have a cup." Magistrate Tiger sniffed in a satisfied manner. "The last question," he announced. "A pestilence of snails has come to a village. One man decides that the best way to get rid of the snails in his garden is to throw the snails into his neighbor's garden. Unfortunately, the neighbor has had the same idea, and snails begin to multiply in both gardens. Before long, the two families are fighting. How do you settle the dispute fairly?" There was a long silence. Both children looked helplessly at each other. Neither had any idea of an answer. Finally, their father looked at them with disgust. "I see you are as feeble-minded as I feared," he said with a scorn that stung more than a blow. His voice began to rise as his customary roar emerged. He threw up his arms, the green silk of his sleeves whipping at them. "You are a disgrace to our ancestry. The blood of the greatest ruler and hero pumps in us, and you cannot answer a simple question. Out! Out of my sight!" The children fled and soon found themselves, as they often did, clinging to their mother for comfort. "Why is he angry all the time?" the boy asked. Even though his sister was a year older than he, she was smaller, and he often felt protective of her. He could feel her trembling like a baby rabbit, and he put his hand on her arm. "He is not angry," their mother said unconvincingly. "It is just the way he must act to accomplish things." "Why?" the boy asked, scowling. "For what?" Their mother was quiet for a moment. "For you," she said finally. "He does all this for you." The boy did not understand this either, but both children were glad that their father soon seemed to forget about them. Indeed, as the days came closer to the mid-autumn moon festivities, Magistrate Tiger seemed like a powerful storm that was best kept away from. When he finally left for the imperial palace, his children sighed with relief. But the children were curious when Magistrate Tiger returned with an extra litter, carried by strong men. The sedan they dragged did not hold a person, but a giant, well-wrapped package. Magistrate Tiger himself was carrying a silk box, as if it were a dragon's pearl. The children looked at each other, then ran so they could peek in through the window of their father's formal chamber. As the men carefully unloaded the package, Duke Jia arrived. "Ah, friend," Duke Jia said warmly. "How happy I am for you. The Emperor was much impressed by your wisdom and intelligence. Are these your prizes?" "Yes, yes," Magistrate Tiger purred. "This is what the Emperor gave me for answering the first question correctly." And he opened the silk box and took out a blue, white, and gold rice bowl on a gold stand. He held it with an air of awe, and Duke Jia gave a sigh of appreciation. "Ah, The finest porcelain in the land, brought out especially for the Emperor's moon festivities, Duke Jia said. Made by perhaps the best potter in history as well. See the ancient rabbit motif? It's the same bowl that the first emperors ate from. A priceless, amazing prize. By then, the men had unwrapped the other package. It was an enormous gang. The giant porcelain bowl was really a tub, almost as high as Magistrate Tiger's shoulders and twice as wide. Painted on its surface, graceful blue fish and lotus flowers seemed to weave together in a silent dance. Magistrate Tiger carefully placed the bowl on the shelf behind him, and then stroked the gang gently. And the gang, made to be an indoor fish pond, Duke Jia said. I was so pleased when you answered the second question and won this. It is perfect for you. Now you will be able to entertain the fish during the winter months as well. Also the finest porcelain, Magistrate Tiger said in a gratified voice. Have you ever seen a gang this size, yet so exquisite and thin? They are both truly wondrous gifts. But no more than you deserve, Duke Jia said. You answered those questions magnificently. Determine the thief by running a race. Share the almond by making it into tea. You answered the Emperor's questions so quickly and brilliantly that it was almost as if you knew what the questions were going to be ahead of time. Ah, Magistrate Tiger said darkly. If I had known the questions ahead of time, I would have been able to answer the Emperor's last question. My dear friend, Duke Jia said, the Emperor has asked the question of the snail dispute every year at the moon festivities. No one has ever answered it. Neighbors throwing snails in each other's gardens. How could anyone solve that fairly? I think it's an impossible question. Perhaps, Magistrate Tiger conceded. The boy began to sputter. Determine the thief? Sharing an almond? Fighting over snails? His sister quickly pulled him away from the window before he exploded. Those were our answers, he cried as soon as they were out of earshot. He found out the questions ahead of time and used our answers. Shh, his sister said, glancing over her shoulder. It doesn't matter anyway. What do you mean? The boy said, still outraged. It was my answer. Well, if everything he does is for you, she said, then it's okay that he took your answer, right? The boy was silent. Did his father roar and trick and lie for him? He felt a mixture of confusion and resentment. It doesn't seem like he does it for me, the boy said sullenly. He does, his sister said, but she sounded more hopeful than sure. Another very interesting story, Rendy, Madame Chang said as she nodded slowly. Yes, Pei almost shouted. Too bad the third question was impossible. We could really use the answer. It would solve everything. What do you mean? Rendy asked. Master Chow coughed. Pei, he began. It's the whole reason why we hate the Yans, and the Yans hate us, Pei said, ignoring her father. Because our ancestors threw snails into each other's gardens. The fight between you and Widow Yan is over snails? Rendy said incredulously. Master Chow coughed again. It's not exactly that, he said. Yes, it is, Pei interrupted, her bitterness giving her the courage to speak before her father in a way Rendy had never seen before. If it wasn't for the snails, then we could be friends with Widow Yan. You and Jiming wouldn't have argued over him marrying Meilan, and he wouldn't have run away. It's all because no one can answer that silly snail question. I know someone who can answer it, Madame Chang said before Master Chow could erupt with indignation, and Rendy could show even more surprise. Everyone stared at her. Who? Rendy asked. Mr. Shan, Madame Chang said. They all turned to Mr. Shan, open-mouthed.
Mr. Shan seemed oblivious to the conversation, playing with the toad again. Madam Chang gently touched his shoulder and looked straight into his eyes.
Mr. Shan, she said, do you know how to settle the problem of the snails?
He looked at her, and again his eyes seemed to clear, like a sky after a storm.
Of course,
Mr. Shan said,